Are you struggling to find new volunteers for your church or ministry? Well, here are 5 essential steps to starting a growing and healthy volunteer ministry. If you've watched any of my videos in the past, you know that I go off of the SERVE framework. Strategize, evaluate, recruit, value, and expand. Today, we're looking at the first letter, the beginning of starting a volunteer program, strategize. How do we strategize? Well, we start with step number 1, which is forecasting and ranking our needs. Whether you are a brand new church plant or a huge multi-site campus, the important thing is that you find out what your ministry or your collection of ministries need, and you prioritize what comes first. To help with that, I've actually included a Google Drive folder in the description that has a bunch of resources available, including the one I'm about to talk about, but also more to come later in the video. This first document is actually an Excel sheet. And this Excel sheet will allow you to plug in values, you should see it on the screen now, that will give you a ranking output based on what you need first. In this example, we're looking at a worship team. Now, assuming that we are starting with no volunteers at all, not even a worship leader, we have some work to do, right? But which do we prioritize first? We're gonna rank our needs 1 through 5, 1 being the least, 5 being the most. And the way that I've formatted this is the importance column is the most important. So it has the highest weight when giving you your calculations. The next highest weight goes to the difficulty to find, the difficulty to locate this volunteer. How rare are these volunteers? Because if you have a very rare volunteer need, you should start working on that sooner rather than the stuff that you can find pretty much anywhere. And then bringing up the tail end of the equation, the one that carries the least amount of weight is the frequency of service. If a position is happening every single week, we need somebody to fill that slot week over week, or even more frequently than that, maybe it's every few days, that is a very important thing. So we would rank that a 4 or maybe a 5. And then we kind of go down from there based on how important these positions are to us. Once you've inputted your data, what you can do, because it's in Excel and it's formatted into a table, is you can click the drop-down box in the total column and you can actually sort highest to lowest. So it will give you your highest priority item that you need to be working on first. And then you can go down from there and fill in the gaps of your team until you finally get to the points where it's like, hey, these are quality of life volunteers. They're not live or die volunteers. These are not volunteers that the ministry is going to fall apart if I don't have. And that's a really good and really healthy place to be in. So this is number 1. You need to figure out what you need and rank them so that you know what to focus on first. Next up is planning a budget. And I know this is a really frustrating thing to talk about because for some of us, our budget's $5. For some of us, our budget is $5,000, right? Our budgets are going to vary from church to church, and that's okay. But the point is, whether you have money or not, you need to figure out how you are going to allocate your resources to accomplish your goal, to accomplish God's goal by growing your ministry in your community. Now, if you ask the next person you see on the street, what should I budget for? What's the high priority thing that I should be spending money on? You'll get a variety of answers. You need to spend money on Volunteer Appreciation Week to show that your volunteers are helpful. You need to spend money on volunteer shirts so that all your volunteers can be the same, can look the same, can have that sense of camaraderie. Sometimes you should spend your money on paid Facebook ads or paid Instagram ads to try to get more people to come to your church so that you can have a bigger volunteer base. There's credit to all of these. Everybody says this out of real, tangible advice, right? Nobody's trying to sabotage you, but I have a different approach. To me, when I'm planning my budget, and you can see a sample budget included in that Google Drive link, it's not as fancy really as the rank forecasting Excel document was, but it is something to work with. What you'll see in my budgets is that I prioritize the things that are going to free me up to do more difficult things. What does that mean? I hate tracking data. It is draining for me to take a sign-in list and add hours to people's accounts based on who was here and how long they were here for. I like to set a significant portion of my budget on automating that process. Now, how do you automate that process? Well, you get a volunteer management system, a software to help you manage your volunteers. For a lot of churches, that system is already in place, and it's Planning Center. Planning Center is great. It offers a suite of features that are flexible for different types of ministries. And if your volunteers are coming from another church, they might already be used to Planning Center because it is sort of the industry standard. That being said, I'm going to offer a different software that I think is better. While Planning Center is what the lion's share of churches in America use, at least from what I've seen, the vast majority of non-church industries that use volunteers things like hospitals, food banks, outreach centers, things like that, they'll use a program called Logistics. And I actually think this one is a little bit better than Planning Center because it has a lot of unique options when it comes to adding features to your volunteers. They're called flags or types, groups. You can add all sorts of different filtering options to your volunteers that allow you to really easily send mass emails to specific volunteers or give hours to certain volunteers that came to certain events and track where people are in their service as well as in their church membership and a bunch of other things. I'm not going to get into too much detail. We can talk about that in a separate video. But what I will say is plan your budget based on the thing that is going to give you the most freedom to do what nobody else can do. God has put you in your position managing volunteers for a reason. Don't waste God's time doing things that you can automate with some sort of system. Enough of that. Step number 3 is identify stakeholders. What does that mean? You are not on an island. You actually operate touching a lot of different types of groups and congregants and pastors and elders and all sorts of people in the ecosystem of your church. It is important that you realize that there are stakeholders that are invested in your success. So who might those be? Well, let's imagine you are the volunteer coordinator for the First Impressions team. You have greeters, you have ushers, you have parking team volunteers, right? Let's assume you're a mid to large size church. You have a couple different groups of volunteers under you, and you want to know who cares, who's involved in my ministry that has an impact on whether I succeed or fail. In a way, you are First Impressions. Everybody is impacted by your ministry, right? Every congregant that comes in is exposed to the greeters or the parking team or somebody on that security team. Pastors are impacted, right? Everybody's impacted, but who are the main stakeholders? Well, for one, the volunteers in your ministry. This is going to be a blanket answer for anybody who asks this question. The volunteers in your ministry are some of your chief stakeholders. Whichever pastor you report to, whether it's the lead pastor, executive pastor, an associate pastor, whoever you report to is obviously a stakeholder in your success. If you print lyrics on the bulletin that you hand out to congregants, the worship leader is a stakeholder in your success. Why are we identifying these people? With stakeholders identified, you have people that you can lean into. And you'll lean into them for a couple reasons. Number one, if you need support, if your team is struggling, these people actually care. I mean, of course, everybody in the congregation cares, but these people have a vested interest in your success. Reach out to them. They can help you. They will also be some of your best marketers. Ask them to identify people in their lives that they think could help your team. How much more effective is it for an associate pastor, an executive pastor to come up to you as a congregant and say, hey, I know you. I think you would be great for this team, versus them seeing it on a pre-roll slide before the sermon starts while they're texting their loved one about they just made it safely. And then lastly, and we're going to cover this in just a second, accountability is huge when it comes to managing your plan and your deadlines, things like that. So having built-in forms of accountability is going to be really helpful for you in the long run. Even though it hurts to be held accountable sometimes, it really is going to be the best for God's work in your ministry. All right, we're almost at the end here. Step number 4 to creating a solid strategy for your volunteer ministry is to create a plan. Now, your first reaction might be, wait a minute, I thought that's what the SERVE framework is. It's a plan from start to finish to get my volunteer ministry up and running and successful and growing. And you're completely right. The SERVE framework is the master blueprint. But within that, we need a plan for each letter. For strategizing our volunteer ministry, we need to determine deadlines. Not only do we need to determine deadlines, we need to find out how are we going to execute these things to get them done by the deadline. In that Google Drive link in the description, you'll find a document that includes some spaces for you to take notes. These are the things that I need to do based on my forecasted rank needs. These are when I need them to be done by, and here's my executables. Here's how I'm going to get them done. Simply putting pen to paper, or in this case, type to screen, in order to fully flesh out your plan going forward, that's going to not only relieve so much stress from you, but it's also going to galvanize you to launch into action. Creating your plan is essential to being able to, 1, track your progress, but 2, give feedback to your stakeholders. If you are utilizing your stakeholders as you should, then they will be asking you, how is it going? What are you doing? What's the plan? This is the sheet that you're going to show them to say, hey, here's how I've met my deadlines or got my deadlines finished even sooner than they were due. Or here are some areas I'm struggling with. Can you please help me? I really cannot find this security team trainer. Your stakeholders are going to be the people that you go to when you realize, oh man, I'm not fulfilling these deadlines that I'm supposed to meet for myself. And hopefully you can see where this is tying in to step number 5, which is really important, but not very fun to talk about, which is implement accountability. The Lord rewards those who are held accountable. And to hold ourselves accountable, we need to loop in our stakeholders and say, these are my goals. This is what I'm doing to achieve them. I need you to check in on me by this time next month and see how I'm doing, where I'm at. Without people intentionally checking in on you and intentionally holding you accountable, human nature sets into place. We're going to procrastinate. We're going to get distracted on new and shinier things. And we're going to lose the motivation that you have right now to grow your ministry. You need to hold on to this fire, stoke it up into a blaze for the glory of God. But we are sinful people. We are born sinners and we will stay sinners until the day that we die. But by the grace of God and the blood of Jesus, we can have accountability that brings us closer to Christ-likeness, which means closer to dedication for his ministries. So reach out to your stakeholders. Tell them, I want to be held accountable. You don't have to meet with them every week over coffee to, pour your heart out, but you need people in place that are going to check in on you to make sure that what you've committed to doing, you are actually doing. And those are the 5 essential steps to strategize your volunteer ministry. Next up in the SERVE framework is evaluate. We've looked inward to strategize. Now let's look outward to evaluate our opportunities, see where we can grow, see where we can recruit, really get into the weeds of how do we build up this ministry. So stay tuned. It's going to be awesome. I will see you next time. God bless and have a great day.